She looked like any normal passenger. But when terrorists attacked Flight 237 at 30,000 feet, the captain heard her voice and froze. He knew that voice from a secret military mission years ago. This wasn't just a passenger. This was Britain's deadliest counter-terrorism operative. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across Heathrow Terminal 5 as passengers shuffled through the boarding gate for Flight 237 to Dubai. Among the crowd of business travelers and holiday makers, a young woman in her late 20s moved quietly through the line. She wore simple jeans, a navy blue jacket, and carried a small backpack. Her brown hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail. Nothing about her suggested anything extraordinary. "Boarding pass, please," the gate agent said with a practiced smile. "Here you are," the woman replied, her British accent crisp and polite. She handed over her documents. The agent scanned the pass. "Thank you, Miss Rhoda Thompson. Seat 32F. Enjoy your flight." Rhoda nodded and walked down the jet bridge toward the massive Boeing 777. The aircraft stood gleaming in the early morning light, ready to carry 347 souls across continents. She found her seat near the back, a window seat that would give her a view of the world passing below. She settled in carefully, placing her backpack under the seat in front of her with practiced efficiency. The elderly gentleman next to her smiled warmly as she sat down. "First time to Dubai?" he asked in a cheerful voice that suggested he enjoyed chatting with fellow travelers. "No, I've been a few times actually," Rhoda replied politely but didn't elaborate further. She pulled out a paperback novel from her bag and opened it to the marked page, a clear signal that she preferred quiet contemplation to conversation during the flight. The man nodded understandingly and returned to his own newspaper. Around them, the plane filled quickly with the usual mix of humanity that populated international flights. Young families struggled with toddlers and overstuffed carry-on bags. Business executives in crisp suits already had their laptops out, ready to work through the 6-hour journey. A group of university students laughed together as they found their seats scattered throughout the cabin. Elderly couples held hands as they prepared for what might be a once-in-a-lifetime trip to the Middle East. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced grace, helping passengers stow luggage in the overhead bins and directing people to their assigned seats. One stopped by Rhoda's row, a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read, "Jessica. Can I get you anything before takeoff, love?" Jessica asked warmly, her own British accent matching Rhoda's. "Just water, please." "Thank you very much," Rhoda said with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jessica had no idea that the polite British woman sitting in seat 32F had spent the last 8 years serving in the most elite Special Forces unit in the world. Rhoda Thompson had been part of the Special Air Service, the legendary SAS that operated in the deepest shadows of British military operations. She had specialized in counter-terrorism, hostage rescue, and high-risk tactical operations that would never appear in any newspaper or history book. Her service record was classified at the highest levels of government security. She had participated in operations across 4 continents, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the streets of Baghdad, from the jungles of Colombia to the deserts of Mali. She had rescued hostages from terrorist compounds, neutralized bomb threats in civilian areas, and conducted surveillance operations against some of the most dangerous people on the planet. She had trained extensively in aircraft security protocols, learning every possible scenario that could unfold at 39,000 feet. She knew how to breach a cockpit door, how to disable a hijacker without endangering passengers, how to coordinate rescue operations in the confined space of an aircraft cabin. She had run drills in mock-up planes, practiced disarming techniques with replica weapons, and studied the psychology of terrorists who targeted commercial aviation. But all of that was behind her now. She had left the service 6 months ago, burned out from years of operations that she could never discuss with friends or family. The nightmares had become too frequent, the emotional toll too heavy. She had seen things that no person should see, done things that were necessary but haunting. The medals she had earned sat in a locked drawer in her small flat in London, never to be displayed or discussed. Today, she was just another passenger on Flight 237. She was flying to Dubai to start a new chapter of her life, a position as a security consultant for a large international corporation. It would be normal work, predictable hours, the kind of job where the biggest emergency might be a forgotten password or a minor breach of protocol. No more jumping from helicopters in the middle of the night. No more raids on terrorist safe houses. No more carrying a weapon everywhere she went. The aircraft door closed with a heavy metallic thunk that resonated through the cabin. The flight attendants moved to their positions and began the safety demonstration that most passengers ignored. They pointed to emergency exits, demonstrated oxygen masks, and showed how to use seat cushions as flotation devices. Most people were already absorbed in their phones, sending last messages before airplane mode, or flipping through magazines, or adjusting their earphones. But Radha watched the entire demonstration with careful attention. She noted each emergency exit, counting the rows from her seat to the nearest one. 14 rows forward to the left side exit, 16 rows back to the rear exit. She observed which passengers looked physically capable in an emergency situation. The athletic young man in row 28. The woman with military bearing in row 35. The strong-looking businessman in row 19. Old habits from years of training died very hard, even when you were trying to leave them behind. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, a calm, authoritative voice announced over the intercom system. I'm Captain James Morrison, and on behalf of First Officer Sarah Chen and the entire crew, I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 237 to Dubai. We're expecting smooth skies today with very favorable winds, giving us a flight time of approximately 6 hours and 50 minutes. We'll be cruising at an altitude of 39,000 feet. The weather in Dubai is sunny and warm, 28 degrees Celsius. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. We'll take good care of you. The engines roared to life with a deep rumble that vibrated through the entire aircraft. The massive Boeing 777 rolled backward from the gate, then turned and began taxiing toward the runway. Radha watched through her window as Terminal 5 slid past, followed by other terminals, cargo buildings, and the complex infrastructure that kept one of the world's busiest airports functioning. Minutes later, they reached the runway. The engines increased to full power, pressing Radha back into her seat as the aircraft accelerated down the long stretch of concrete. The ground rushed past faster and faster until that magical moment when the nose lifted, the wings found their grip on the air, and 300 tons of metal and humanity rose gracefully into the sky. Radha watched London shrink below her. The neat patterns of streets and houses gave way to patchwork fields of green and brown. Soon they were climbing through layers of clouds, breaking into brilliant sunshine above. She thought about her new life waiting in Dubai. A normal job with normal hours and normal stress. No more carrying the weight of life and death decisions. No more operations that kept her awake for days. No more funerals for fellow operators who didn't make it home. She allowed herself a small smile. This was going to be good. A fresh start in a new city. Maybe she would finally sleep through the night without the dreams. Maybe she would make friends who didn't carry weapons and tactical gear. Maybe she would find some peace. If only she had known how completely wrong she was about this flight being routine. 2 hours passed peacefully as the aircraft cruised over Europe. The flight attendants had served lunch, a choice between chicken with rice or pasta with vegetables. Most passengers had settled into the comfortable monotony of long-distance air travel. Some dozed with their seats reclined, mouths slightly open, lulled by the steady drone of the engines. Others watched movies on the seatback screens, laughing at comedies or absorbed in dramas. Business travelers typed away on laptops, working on presentations or reports. Parents tried to keep children entertained with games and snacks. Radha had finished her book, a thriller that seemed amusingly amateur given her real-world experience with the kind of operations it described. She stared out the window at the landscape far below, an endless expanse of clouds that looked like a cotton field stretching to every horizon. Somewhere down there was the Mediterranean Sea, though it was completely hidden by the cloud cover. The elderly gentleman beside her had fallen asleep, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap, his breathing slow and steady. Jessica and the other flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, collecting meal trays and offering drinks, their movements practiced and efficient. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Perfectly routine. Just another international flight among the thousands that crossed the skies every single day. Then Radha noticed something that made her entire body tense. 3 rows ahead and across the aisle, a man stood up and walked toward the front of the plane. On the surface, there was nothing unusual about that. Passengers got up constantly to use the restrooms, to stretch their legs, to retrieve items from overhead bins. But Radha's trained eye caught something in the way this man moved. His walk was too purposeful, too controlled. His eyes scanned the cabin with a systematic pattern that suggested threat assessment rather than casual observation. And his hand brushed against his jacket pocket in a gesture that Radha recognized immediately from years of training. He was checking a weapon, making sure it was ready, the way operators did before going into action. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her breathing steady. She didn't move, didn't give any sign that she had noticed anything unusual. But her mind shifted into a different mode, the operational awareness that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. She watched from the corner of her eye as another man stood up 4 rows ahead on her side of the aisle. Then a third man rose from his seat near the front of the plane. All 3 moving at almost exactly the same moment. All 3 with that same purposeful, controlled movement pattern. All 3 checking their pockets in that telltale gesture. Radha's stomach dropped. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordinated action. These men were working together. And if they were coordinating movements while checking weapons, that meant only one thing. The aircraft was about to be hijacked. Her mind raced through possibilities and protocols. How many hostiles? At least 3, possibly more. What weapons? Unknown, but likely knives or small firearms that had somehow made it through security. What was their objective? Could be ransom, political demands, or something worse. How much time before they acted? Seconds, maybe less. The first man reached the front galley area where 2 flight attendants were preparing drinks. Jessica approached him with her professional smile firmly in place, unaware of the danger. "Can I help you, sir? The restroom is just behind you on the right." In one smooth, practiced motion, the man pulled a knife from inside his jacket. The blade was at least 6 inches long, gleaming wickedly under the cabin lights. He grabbed Jessica with his other hand and pressed the knife against her throat hard enough to dimple the skin but not yet draw blood. "Nobody move," he shouted in heavily accented English. Eastern European, Radha's mind registered automatically. "Everyone stay in seats or this woman dies right now." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Screams erupted throughout the cabin like a wave. Passengers jumped to their feet in panic. Children began crying. People grabbed for their phones. A woman 2 rows ahead fainted and slumped against the window. The quiet normalcy of the flight shattered into chaos and terror in the space of a heartbeat. "Phones down," the first hijacker screamed, pulling Jessica tighter against him. "Hands where I can see them. This aircraft belongs to us now. We control everything." The second and third men pulled out their own knives, moving quickly to block the aisles and prevent anyone from rushing them. They brandished the weapons menacingly, their eyes hard and cold. Then a 4th man appeared from the very back of the aircraft, moving with military precision toward the cockpit. He had a small pistol in his hand, black metal that caught the light as he moved. Radha's trained eye identified it as a compact 9mm, probably a Glock or similar model. Somehow, impossibly, he had smuggled a firearm through airport security. Her mind processed the tactical situation with cold efficiency. 4 hijackers that she could see. 3 with knives, 1 with a gun. The one with the gun was the primary threat. He could kill multiple people in seconds. The ones with knives were dangerous but limited in range. They needed to be close to their victims. All four appeared trained, moving with coordination and purpose. This wasn't amateur hour. These were professionals executing a planned operation. The man with the pistol reached the reinforced cockpit door and pounded on it with his fist. "Open this door immediately. You have 10 seconds or we start executing passengers one by one." In the cockpit, Captain James Morrison heard the shouting and felt his blood run cold. He had 23 years of flying experience, had landed planes with engine failures, had navigated through terrible storms, had dealt with every kind of mechanical emergency. But he had never faced this nightmare scenario. This was every pilot's worst fear. Terrorists on the aircraft with 347 innocent lives at stake. His co-pilot, First Officer Sarah Chen, was already transmitting on the emergency frequency. Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is British Airways Flight 237. We are declaring an emergency. We have a hijacking in progress. Repeat, hijacking in progress. For suspected terrorists. They are armed with knives and at least one firearm. Request immediate assistance." Morrison slammed his hand down on the control that locked the reinforced cockpit door. After September 11, cockpit doors had been redesigned to withstand tremendous force. They could resist gunfire, battering rams, and explosive breaches. No one was getting through that door without the pilots opening it from inside. But that protection came with a terrible cost. The pilots were safe, but the passengers and crew in the cabin were completely vulnerable and exposed to whatever these hijackers wanted to do. The hijacker with the gun fired a shot at the cockpit door. The sound was deafening in the confined space, like a thunderclap that made passengers scream even louder. The bullet buried itself in the reinforced material but didn't penetrate. The door was doing its job. "Last warning," the hijacker shouted, his voice rising in anger and frustration. "Open this door or I will shoot a passenger. You have 10 seconds and then someone dies. 10. 9. 8. He turned toward the cabin, his eyes scanning the terrified faces for a suitable victim. His gaze landed on a young woman in her early 20s holding an infant who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. The baby was crying, sensing its mother's fear. "You," the hijacker pointed at her with the gun. "Stand up right now." The woman clutched her infant tighter and shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Please, please don't hurt my baby. Please." The hijacker grabbed her arm roughly and dragged her into the aisle. The baby's cries intensified. "Open the door or this baby dies first." 6. 5. 4. In seat 32F, Radha's military training completely took over. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing became controlled. Her mind entered the state that her SAS instructors had called operational clarity, where fear and doubt disappeared and only mission objectives remained. She assessed the tactical situation with the speed that came from 8 years of elite counterterrorism training. 4 hostile targets. 1 primary threat with firearm. 3 secondary threats with edged weapons. Hostiles were spread throughout the cabin attempting to control 300 passengers. They were outnumbered but held the advantage of weapons and surprise. They would be aggressive, willing to kill to establish dominance through fear. They needed to maintain that fear to control the situation. Radha had trained for exactly this scenario. Aircraft hijacking response was a core component of SAS counterterrorism training. She had run through drills in mock-up aircraft cabins dozens of times. She had practiced disarming techniques against instructors with replica weapons. She had studied the psychology of hijackers, learning how they thought, how they planned, what mistakes they typically made. But this wasn't a drill or training exercise. These were real terrorists with real weapons. Real people would die if she made even the smallest mistake. A baby was being held at gunpoint. A flight attendant had a knife pressed to her throat. 347 lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes. She took one slow, controlled breath. She couldn't take all 4 hijackers at once by herself. She would need help and coordination. And she needed the pilots to know what was happening in the cabin, to know that they had someone capable of fighting back. The hijacker pressed his pistol against the young mother's head. The metal touched her temple. The baby wailed in her arms. 3, 2, 1. Radha made her decision. She quietly unbuckled her seatbelt, making sure the small click was covered by the chaos of screaming passengers. She leaned forward slightly, shifting her weight onto the balls of her feet, preparing her body to move explosively fast. "Wait!" Radha shouted in a clear, commanding voice that cut through the panic like a knife. "Don't shoot. I'm a doctor. Let me help if anyone is injured." The hijacker with the gun spun toward her voice, his weapon momentarily pointing away from the mother and baby. "Shut up. Sit down. I'm just trying to help," Radha said, raising her hands in a non-threatening gesture but staying partially crouched, ready to spring into action. "People are having panic attacks back here. Children are hyperventilating. Someone could die from a heart attack or stroke. Let me move through the cabin and provide medical assistance." "I said sit down or I shoot you next," the hijacker screamed, his face red with anger. But Radha had accomplished exactly what she needed. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison froze as he heard that voice. That specific voice with that specific tone and accent. He knew that voice. It was impossible, completely impossible, but he was absolutely certain. 8 years ago, Morrison had been flying military transport missions for the Royal Air Force. He had been assigned to a highly classified operation, flying an SAS team into hostile territory in Pakistan. The mission commander had personally briefed him on the flight plan, security protocols, and emergency procedures. That commander had been a woman with a calm, precise voice that conveyed absolute competence and authority. Her briefing had been the most professional he had ever received. He had never forgotten that voice or that mission. Operation Sandstorm, they had called it. 16 hours of flying into some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. And that same exact voice had just spoken in his cabin. Morrison grabbed the internal phone that connected directly to the head flight attendant station. His hand was shaking. "This is the captain. The woman who just spoke, British accent, offering medical help. I need to know exactly where she is sitting. Right now." The head flight attendant, Michael, was pressed against the galley wall with another hijacker's knife inches from his face. He whispered into his headset as quietly as possible. "Rear cabin, left side window seat, approximately row 32. Brown hair, late 20s, wearing a blue jacket." Morrison's mind raced. What were the odds? Millions of people flew every year. What were the chances that Major Radha Thompson, one of the most decorated counter-terrorism operators in British Special Forces history, just happened to be on his aircraft during a hijacking? But if there was even a possibility that it was her, she represented their only hope. She would know how to fight back. She would have the training and skills to neutralize these threats. He needed to confirm her identity and, if it was her, give her authorization to act. He made a decision that would either save everyone aboard or get people killed. He activated the intercom system so his voice would be broadcast throughout the entire cabin, including to the hijackers. "This is Captain Morrison speaking. To the individual who offered medical assistance, I want to thank you for your offer and your courage. I am authorizing you to move freely throughout the cabin to provide emergency medical care to any passengers who need it. We have people aboard with specialized training who know how to handle high-stress emergency situations. Those individuals should be allowed to perform their duties. Lives depend on having proper emergency response protocols in place." The hijacker with the gun looked confused. What? No. Nobody moves. Nobody. But Morrison continued, speaking in a way that seemed directed at the hijackers but was actually a coded message. His voice carried layers of meaning that only someone with military experience would understand. I'm sure everyone recognizes that we need to follow established emergency procedures. Trained personnel with special operations experience should be permitted to use their skills when lives are at risk. That's simply proper protocol. Radha understood immediately and completely. The captain knew who she was. He recognized her voice from their previous military operation together. He was telling the hijackers that she was just medical personnel while simultaneously telling her that he recognized her special forces background and was giving her authorization to act. He was using the word operations deliberately. He was telling her to operate. Her pulse steadied. Her mind cleared completely. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an ally in the cockpit who understood the situation. Captain Morrison was giving her tactical authorization and trusting her to save his aircraft. The lead hijacker, the one with the pistol, was uncertain now. A doctor moving through the cabin could actually be useful. Passengers were panicking badly. People could have heart attacks or medical emergencies. Dead hostages before they made their demands known wasn't part of their plan. They needed living hostages. Fine, he growled after a moment. But if you try anything at all, I shoot this woman and her baby first. Then I shoot you. Do you understand me? I understand perfectly, Radha said calmly. I'm just here to help people who are injured or sick. She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. She stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the front of the aircraft, but her eyes were constantly moving, assessing, calculating. She was counting steps, measuring distances, identifying potential weapons. An oxygen bottle in an overhead compartment. A fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. A metal coffee pot in the galley. Everything could be a weapon if you knew how to use it. She reached a teenage girl who was hyperventilating badly, her chest heaving, her face pale. Look at me, Radha said gently, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose slowly, hold for 3 seconds, out through your mouth. Just like this. She demonstrated the breathing technique, but her eyes were scanning past the girl, watching the hijackers, noting their positions and movement patterns. The one with the gun stayed near the cockpit, nervous and jumpy. The 3 with knives had spread out to control the cabin, but they were stretched too thin trying to watch 300 people. They couldn't maintain visual contact with everyone simultaneously. That created gaps in their coverage, blind spots that could be exploited. As Radha moved forward row by row, pretending to check on frightened passengers, she passed close to one of the knife-wielding hijackers. He was young, probably mid-20s, with nervous eyes and hands that trembled slightly. Not a professional soldier. Maybe a true believer recruited for this operation. His knife technique was wrong, holding the blade in a way that looked threatening but was tactically ineffective. An amateur. That was valuable information. She continued forward, helping an elderly man who was clutching his chest and gasping. My heart pills, he wheezed. In the overhead bin. I need them. Radha reached up slowly, making sure the hijacker with the gun could see her hands. I'm just getting his medication from the overhead compartment. As her hand went into the bin, her training kicked in automatically. She was now within striking distance of the primary threat, perhaps 4 meters away. If she moved explosively fast, she could close that distance in under 2 seconds. Her hand could disarm him before he could aim and fire accurately. But the other 3 would react immediately. Passengers could get caught in the chaos. She needed to reduce the number of threats first. She needed a better tactical moment. She handed the elderly man his pills and a bottle of water from the galley. Take these slowly. You're going to be fine. Just breathe normally. The lead hijacker's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with his free hand, keeping the gun trained on the cabin. He read a message and his expression changed, becoming harder, more determined. Whatever he had received, it wasn't good news. Change of plans, he announced to his team in a language Rada didn't recognize, but his tone was clear. The situation was escalating. He switched back to English. We're diverting this aircraft. Send the message to the pilots. Now. One of the knife-wielding hijackers pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket and approached the cockpit door. He slid it underneath, into the cockpit. Morrison picked up the paper with shaking hands. He read it and his face went completely pale. "Dear God," he whispered. Chen leaned over. "What is it?" "They want us to divert to an abandoned military airfield outside Damascus. In Syria. They're planning to use this plane for something." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. This wasn't about ransom or prisoner release. This was about turning Flight 237 into a weapon, probably for a propaganda video before they crashed it into a target or executed everyone aboard on camera. Morrison activated the intercom again. He needed to warn Rada without alerting the hijackers to what he was doing. "Attention passengers and crew. We are being forced to change our flight path due to the current situation. This will put us over extremely dangerous territory within approximately 90 minutes. Everyone needs to understand the gravity of what we're facing. Standard counterterrorism emergency protocols must be implemented immediately. Time is critical." Rada caught every word. 90 minutes. That was her operational window. She had 90 minutes to neutralize all 4 threats before the aircraft entered Syrian airspace. Once they were over Syria, everything changed. Syrian air defenses might shoot them down. The hijackers might crash the plane. Other terrorist forces on the ground might be waiting. 90 minutes was her deadline. She continued moving through the cabin, but now she was actively recruiting. She stopped beside a man in his 40s, well-built with short hair and perfect posture despite the chaos. Military bearing was unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. She leaned down, pretending to check his seatbelt, and whispered barely audibly, "Former military?" The man's eyes widened in recognition. Another operator recognizing operational behavior. He gave the smallest possible nod. "When I move against the primary target, I need you to take down the hostile in row 23 with the knife. Can you do that?" Another micro nod. His eyes were steady. He was in. Rada moved to the next row. A woman in her 30s sat rigid with controlled fear. But her eyes were tracking the hijackers with a professional assessment that suggested law enforcement training. "Police?" Rada whispered as she pretended to help the passenger next to her. "Detective. London Metropolitan Police," the woman breathed almost inaudibly. "When this starts, tackle the one in row 18. Don't let him use that knife." "Understood." 3 rows back, 2 young men, probably university students, looked athletic and angry. They kept whispering to each other, clearly considering trying something foolish that would get them killed. Rada stopped beside them. "Listen carefully," she said quietly. "I'm former SAS. When I give the signal, you 2 take down the hijacker at the rear. Both of you together. Don't try to be heroes. Just overwhelm him with numbers. Can you do that?" Their eyes went wide. One of them nodded. "We can do it. Wait for my signal. Not before. Timing is everything." Rada had now identified 5 capable allies positioned throughout the cabin. Not ideal, but it would have to be enough. She needed one more element. She needed chaos to break the hijacker's concentration. The lead hijacker was getting impatient. He gestured with his gun. "Enough. You're done playing doctor. Sit down now." "I'm nearly finished," Rada said calmly. "Just checking one more section." "I said sit down." Radha turned to face him directly. For just a moment, she let her British politeness drop completely. Her eyes became cold and hard, the eyes of someone who had killed when necessary and slept just fine afterward. I'm trying to keep your hostages alive and healthy so you can actually use them for your demands. Unless you want passengers dying from panic attacks and heart attacks before you reach your destination. The hijacker hesitated. He was accustomed to seeing fear, submission, and obedience. But this woman showed absolutely none of those things. Her complete lack of fear actually unsettled him. It was wrong, unnatural. 2 more minutes, he finally said. Then you sit or I shoot someone just to prove I'm serious. Understood, Radha said. She moved toward the rear galley where Jessica was still being held with a knife to her throat. The flight attendant's eyes were red from crying, but she had stayed remarkably calm considering the circumstances. Radha pretended to check supplies in the galley while speaking very quietly to Jessica. What's your name? Jessica, the woman whispered. Jessica, I need you to trust me completely. In a few minutes, I'm going to create a distraction. When I say the words, medical emergency, I need you to drop straight down to the floor. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just drop. The knife will go over your head. Can you do that? Jessica's eyes filled with hope for the first time since the hijacking began. Yes. I can do that. Good. Be ready. It's going to happen fast. Radha moved back toward her seat, passing the mother with the baby. The hijacker was still using them as his primary hostages, keeping them close. The baby had cried itself into exhausted sleep. The mother's eyes were hollow with terror. Radha caught her attention and mouthed silently, "Get ready to run." The mother didn't respond, but Radha saw recognition in her eyes. Radha returned to seat 32F and sat down, but she didn't buckle her seatbelt. She closed her eyes as if resting, but her mind was running through the attack sequence for the 100th time. Timing would be absolutely critical. She would have perhaps 3 seconds of total surprise. In those 3 seconds, she needed to disarm the primary threat, signal her allies, and create enough chaos to prevent the other hijackers from killing hostages in response. She had trained for this scenario hundreds of times in the SAS Killing House, a special training facility where operators practiced close-quarters combat against multiple threats. But training and reality were very different. In training, mistakes meant you ran the drill again. In reality, mistakes meant people died. 15 minutes passed. The hijackers began to relax slightly. The British woman had sat down as ordered. The passengers were terrified but controlled. Everything was proceeding according to their plan. In 75 minutes, they would force the pilots to land in Syria. Their comrades on the ground would be waiting. The propaganda victory would be enormous. They had no idea what was about to happen. Then, as if on cue, a small child in the middle section started crying. Not the baby being held hostage, but a toddler about 3 years old who had been quiet until now. The child's wails grew louder and louder, piercing and relentless. One of the knife-wielding hijackers, already on edge, moved toward the sound with irritation. "Shut that child up. Shut up now." The mother tried desperately to calm her daughter, but the crying only intensified. The hijacker raised his knife threateningly. "I said shut up or I will give you something to cry about." The distraction was perfect. All 4 hijackers' attention focused on the crying child. Their concentration broke for just a moment. That moment was all Radha needed. She exploded from her seat with shocking speed, moving faster than most people thought humanly possible. 8 years of SAS training had honed her body into a weapon. She covered the distance to the lead hijacker in less than 2 seconds, her feet barely seeming to touch the floor. The hijacker with the gun turned toward her, his brain processing the movement, his finger beginning to squeeze the trigger. But Radha was already inside his defensive range. She used a disarming technique that only Special Forces operators knew, a move developed specifically for situations exactly like this. Her left hand struck his wrist with devastating precision, using the edge of her palm like a blade. The strike hit the exact nerve cluster that controlled his grip. His fingers went numb instantly and involuntarily opened. Simultaneously, her right hand drove upward into his throat, not hard enough to crush his windpipe but hard enough to make him gag and lose focus. His body's automatic response was to protect his airway, to bring his hands up to his injured throat. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers. Radha caught it before it hit the floor, her hand wrapping around the grip with practiced familiarity. She had fired thousands of rounds through pistols just like this one during her training. It felt natural in her hand, like an extension of her arm. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. She immediately pointed the weapon at the nearest hijacker with a knife, the one who had been threatening the crying child. "Drop the knife. Now." But the other hijackers reacted faster than she expected. The one near the front of the cabin grabbed a businessman from his seat, a man in his 50s, and pressed his knife against the man's throat hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Drop the gun or he dies," the hijacker screamed. "I will cut his throat right now." At the same moment, the hijacker near the rear grabbed an elderly woman and used her as a human shield, his knife poised to strike. 3 hostages were now in immediate danger. Radha had eliminated one threat but the situation was still critical. "Medical emergency!" Radha shouted at the top of her voice. Jessica, the flight attendant who had been waiting for that exact phrase, dropped straight down to the floor like her legs had been cut from under her. The hijacker holding her was caught completely off guard. His knife slashed through empty air where her throat had been a fraction of a second before. The former military man Radha had recruited lunged from his seat with perfect timing. He had been watching, waiting for his moment. He tackled the hijacker who had lost his hostage, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection with the force of a professional rugby player. They crashed into the seats in a tangle of limbs. The hijacker's knife went flying. The female detective moved with the confidence of someone who had made hundreds of arrests. She grabbed the hijacker threatening the crying child from behind, getting her arm around his neck in a textbook chokehold. He struggled violently but she had leverage and training. "Drop it. Drop the weapon." The 2 university students rushed the hijacker at the rear of the plane. He tried to use his elderly hostage as a shield but the students hit him from 2 different angles simultaneously. One grabbed his knife arm while the other tackled him low. The elderly woman scrambled away to safety. All 3 men went down in a heap. That left only one hijacker still standing with a hostage, the one holding the businessman with a knife to his throat. His eyes were wild with panic now. His carefully planned operation was falling apart around him. "Stay back," he screamed at Radha. "Stay back or I swear I will kill him. I will cut his throat." Radha aimed the pistol with absolutely steady hands. Her breathing was controlled. Her heart rate was elevated but not racing. She had been in this exact situation before, multiple times during her SAS career. Hostage scenarios in training. Hostage situations in real operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. She knew exactly what to do. "You're not going to kill anyone," she said in a voice like ice. Her British accent was crisp and clear. "Look around you. Your team is finished. 3 of your men are on the ground being restrained by passengers. You're alone. You have 1 hostage and I have a gun pointed at your head. I'll do it. I swear I'll do it." "No, you won't," Radha said with absolute certainty. "Because if you hurt him, I will shoot you. And I don't miss. I'm former Special Air Service, Counter-Terrorism Unit. I've been in this exact situation 12 times in my career. Every single time I've pulled this trigger, I've hit exactly what I aimed at from distances much farther than this. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you believe me." Something in her tone, in her complete and utter confidence, in the cold certainty of her eyes, made the hijacker understand that she was telling the absolute truth. She would shoot. She would hit him. And he would die. His knife hand began to tremble. Sweat ran down his face. He looked around desperately for help, but there was none coming. His team was down. His plan had failed. He was alone facing someone who knew exactly how to kill him. Last chance, Radha said quietly. Drop the knife and let him go. Do it now or I fire. The knife clattered to the floor. The businessman scrambled away, his hand pressed to the small cut on his neck. Passengers erupted in cheers and sobs of relief, the sound deafening in the enclosed cabin. The former military man quickly secured the remaining hijacker with zip-tie restraints that the flight attendants provided. Within 3 minutes, all 4 hijackers were restrained, their weapons collected, their threat neutralized. Radha safed the pistol, removing the magazine and clearing the chamber with the automatic precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She handed both pieces to the head flight attendant. Secure these separately in the cockpit. The magazine goes in one locked container, the pistol in another. She walked to the front of the aircraft and knocked on the reinforced cockpit door. Captain Morrison, this is Radha Thompson. The situation is secure. All 4 hostiles have been neutralized and restrained. The aircraft is safe. There was a pause, then the sound of locks disengaging. The door opened. Captain Morrison stood there staring at her with an expression of absolute amazement mixed with profound relief. Major Thompson, he said quietly. I knew I recognized your voice. Operation Sandstorm. Pakistan. 4 years ago. I flew your team in. I remember, Captain, Radha said with a slight smile. You did excellent work that night. And thank you for trusting me today. Morrison shook his head in wonder. You just saved 347 lives. I should be thanking you. What are the odds that you would be on my aircraft during a hijacking? Sometimes luck works in our favor, Radha replied. We need to contact authorities immediately. Dubai needs to have their counter-terrorism units ready when we land. These men will have information about their organization. Co-pilot Chen was already on the radio. Dubai Control, this is British Airways 237. The hijacking situation has been resolved. All 4 terrorists are in custody. We are requesting armed security teams and medical personnel to meet the aircraft on arrival. We have minor injuries but no fatalities. Copy that, 237, came the response. Counter-terrorism units are being scrambled now. Medical team standing by. You are cleared for priority landing. Excellent work. Morrison turned back to Radha. Will you come into the cockpit? I'd like you here for the landing. You've earned it. Thank you, but I should stay in the cabin, Radha said. Some passengers are in shock. Others are injured. I can help more out here. She returned to the main cabin where flight attendants were already providing first aid and emotional support. The teenage girl who had been hyperventilating was breathing normally now, though she was shaking. The elderly man with the heart condition was stable but exhausted. The businessman who had been held hostage needed butterfly bandages for the knife cut on his neck. Radha moved through the rows, checking on people, offering quiet words of reassurance. The mother with the baby hugged her tightly, crying with relief. You saved us. You saved my baby. You were very brave, Radha told her gently. Your daughter is going to grow up knowing her mother was incredibly strong. The former military man approached her and extended his hand. Captain David Hughes, Royal Marines, retired. That was the finest piece of close-quarters combat I've ever witnessed. Where did you train? Hereford, Radha said simply. That single word told him everything. Hereford was the home of SAS headquarters. Only the best of the best trained there. Hughes nodded with deep respect. I should have known. Bloody brilliant work. The female detective introduced herself as well. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams. I've never seen anyone move that fast. You probably just saved my career. I was about to do something stupid that would have gotten people killed. You did exactly right, Radha assured her. You waited for the signal and then acted decisively. That's excellent tactical discipline. The two university students were practically bouncing with adrenaline. That was incredible. You were like an action movie but real. Can we take a selfie with you? Radha laughed despite herself. Maybe later. Right now, I need you two to help the flight attendants. People need water, blankets, and someone to talk to. Can you do that? They nodded eagerly and hurried off to help. As the aircraft continued its flight toward Dubai, the cabin gradually returned to something approaching normalcy. The four hijackers sat in the rear section, zip-tied and guarded by volunteers. Children stopped crying. Passengers began talking quietly, processing what had just happened. Some were already on their phones, texting loved ones that they were safe. Jessica found Radha and hugged her fiercely. You saved my life. That knife was at my throat. I thought I was going to die. You saved yourself, Radha told her. You trusted me and followed instructions perfectly under extreme stress. That took real courage. Will you be in trouble? For what you did? Jessica asked worriedly. Radha shook her head. No. The captain authorized me to act. And besides, counterterrorism response is completely legal when protecting lives from an active threat. I'll need to give statements to authorities, but there won't be any issues. 2 hours later, Flight 237 began its descent into Dubai. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The city's incredible skyline rose from the sands, a forest of gleaming towers that seemed to defy gravity. Morrison's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into Dubai International Airport. On behalf of First Officer Chen and myself, I want to thank you for your incredible courage during today's events. I especially want to acknowledge the extraordinary actions of one passenger whose training and bravery saved everyone aboard this aircraft. We are alive because of her. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. People turned to look at Radha, clapping and cheering. She felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had never been comfortable with attention or praise. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway. As promised, Dubai's elite counterterrorism units surrounded the plane immediately. Armed officers in tactical gear formed a perimeter. Ambulances and police vehicles waited nearby with lights flashing. The four hijackers were taken off first, escorted by heavily armed security forces. Intelligence officers immediately began interviewing Radha and the other witnesses. The interviews took nearly 3 hours, going through every detail of the hijacking and response. Finally, well after midnight, Radha was cleared to leave the airport. Her luggage had been held for security inspection but was eventually returned. She walked out into the warm Dubai night, exhausted both physically and emotionally. A black car was waiting at the curb. A woman in her 50s stepped out, extending her hand. Miss Thompson. I'm Sarah Chen's mother. Sarah called me and told me what happened. I own a hotel here in Dubai. You'll be staying as my guest for as long as you like. No charges. It's the least I can do for the woman who saved my daughter's life. Radha was too tired to argue. Thank you. That's very kind. 3 days later, after giving additional statements to British and Emirati authorities, Radha finally had time to process everything that had happened. She sat in a cafe overlooking the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, drinking tea and watching the city move around her. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages from Captain Morrison thanking her again. Messages from passengers she had saved. Media requests for interviews that she ignored. And finally, a message from a number she recognized. Major Thompson. Your actions on Flight 237 have been noted at the highest levels. The Prime Minister himself has asked to commend you personally. More importantly, British Special Forces Command would like to discuss your return to active service. Your skills are needed now more than ever. The world needs operators like you. Please consider it. Director, UKSF. Radha stared at the message for a long time. Part of her missed it desperately. The sense of purpose. The knowledge that she was protecting people. The camaraderie of working with other elite operators. The adrenaline and challenge of operations that pushed her to her absolute limits. But another part of her remembered why she had left. The nightmares. The psychological toll. The friends who didn't come home. The knowledge that one day, she might not be fast enough or good enough, and people would die because of it. She typed a response. Thank you for the offer. I'm honored. But I need to respectfully decline. I've served my time. There are younger operators who can take my place. I'm ready for a different life now. She hit send before she could change her mind. Her phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was from Captain Morrison. Drinks on me next time you're in London. You saved my crew, my passengers, and my aircraft. I owe you everything. You're a genuine hero, Radha. Thank you. She smiled and typed back. Just doing what I was trained to do, Captain. But I'll definitely take you up on those drinks. See you in London. Another message appeared, this one from Jessica, the flight attendant. I just wanted you to know that I'm going back to work next week. I was scared I wouldn't be able to fly again after what happened. But then I remembered how calm and confident you were. If you could face down 4 terrorists with a gun, I can handle some turbulence and rude passengers. You inspired me to be braver. Thank you. Radha felt tears sting her eyes. That message meant more to her than all the official commendations in the world. As the sun set over Dubai, Radha thought about everything that had happened. She had boarded Flight 237 as an ordinary passenger, trying to leave her military life behind. But when crisis came, her training and instincts had taken over automatically. She had done what needed to be done to protect innocent people. Maybe she couldn't completely leave that part of herself behind. Maybe it would always be part of who she was. But that didn't mean she had to go back to active service. She could use those skills in other ways. Security consulting. Training others. Being ready to act if circumstances demanded it. She had saved 347 lives because Captain Morrison had recognized her voice. One voice in a cabin full of terrified passengers. One voice that reminded him of a mission years ago. One voice that changed everything. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. One person with the right skills in the right place at the right time, willing to act when others freeze in fear. Radha finished her tea and stood up. She had a new job starting tomorrow. A normal job with normal hours. But she knew now that she would never be completely normal. She would always be watching, always assessing threats, always ready to act if needed. And somehow, that was okay. Because the world needed people like her. Not wearing uniforms or carrying badges, but living ordinary lives while possessing extraordinary skills. Ready to become heroes when the moment demanded it. She walked back to her hotel through the glittering Dubai night, just another woman in a crowd of millions. But she knew the truth. She was Radha Thompson, former SAS operator, counter-terrorism specialist, and the woman who had saved Flight 237. And if the moment came again, she would be ready.